3, 2, 1.
Hi everybody, is it okay? Welcome to Gravesend on a rather wet and miserable Sunday morning. I come here for the British Masters 10-mile Championships, my first race for some months, so looking forward to this. Not sure how I'm going to go. I've got the next percent in today because it's rather wet, so I think it'd be a good shoe for the wet. I was half thinking of trying the Alpha Flies, but maybe there'll be a bit of a sponge in the wet weather. I've also got two Stryds on. I've got the new one on the left and the older one on the right, so I want to give them a bit of a go, see how they do. Anyway, so I'll go and get registered.
I'm going to tell you now, just to remind you, it's 6.5 laps.
Okay, so we're just jogging down to the start. Got about 5 to 10 minutes to go, I think. Probably going the right way. Nice little downhill bit here. The wind's dropped a bit, so that's encouraging. But these cycle courses are never flat, so I'm trying to get into a rhythm and see what I do. My watch is predicting about 68 minutes, so anywhere around there would be not too bad.
And they will give you safety.
Thank you for braving the weather. I'll try and keep this as short as possible. You've got 6.5 laps of the circuit to do, and this is where it's really important. You count your own laps. Please don't shout at us how many I've got, because we'll definitely give you the wrong answer. Enjoy your race, everybody, and stay safe out there. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, British Masters 10-mile race, we're off. Okay, about 2.5 miles done. I feel like I'm settling okay, but it's a bit undulating, so pace is a bit variable. But I did 6:24, I think, 6:49, so okay. Got a few to chase here. Okay, just through 10k in, 41.45. Really got to hang on now. It's kind of easy one way, big downhill, and we're going on a little drag now, so the old legs need to hang on. Okay, almost there. Oh. That's about what I hoped for, 68.12, I think it was. Yeah, I'd take that. Tough course, because you're going to get a rhythm, either down or up. Bit of wind behind. Alright, let's get a drink. Did you win the 65, do you think?
No, there's two of them here, so I'm third.
Oh, right.
I think I'm third anyway.
Okay, well done. Okay, I have to get my official time, it's about 68.15, something like that, about 6:50 pace. So it's bang on sub-3 pace for 10 miles. So that was a bit of a rude awakening, but it's about what I expected to be. See if anything perhaps slightly better. I thought the worst case might not even break 70 minutes, but tough course that, because it's hard to find a rhythm. They had a sort of swooping downhill bit past the start-finish line, and of course you have to come back the other way, and the other way into the wind as well as sort of slightly drag up. So yeah, he was trying to find out what was the best rhythm. So yeah, I mean the laps seem to be all over the place. I put the laps bits up there, but yeah, I'll take that. There was a few guys that lapped me, including the M55 winner right at the end, so it was slightly annoying to be lapped by the winner, as it were. There's probably about 6 or 7 other guys that were ahead of him. I remember seeing Simon Baines there. I remember when I did my London Marathon PB, I managed to beat him, so he's held his form somewhat better than I have. Anyway, but I'll take that, step forward in the right direction. It's my first race for a while. These longer races do take a bit of concentration, I find. The next percent, the originals did very well, as ever. Wasn't as wet as perhaps it might have been, the rain actually stopped, but it wasn't exactly great weather, bit of wind in the air, but not too bad for an exposed course. Quite a nice course though, because it's sort of so off-road that there was no danger from cars or anything, but you just have to remember how many laps you had. But these days wearing GPS watches, I had 3 on to test all these Garmin's and the Stryd. So I put up some Stryd stats later when I've downloaded it all to see what it all makes of it. Anyway, I hope you find this interesting. Like, subscribe, all that, and see you the next one then. Bye! Okay, so let's have a look at the Stryd stats. I've got on the left here the Next Generation one, think Star Trek Next Generation one, and the older Stryd Wind on the right. Now, the first thing to notice is that the power average for the Next Generation one was somewhat higher, 309 watts of 72 kilograms, and only 294 with the Stryd Wind. Now, the main reason for that is that the Next Generation one seems to give me 4% air power with that Stryd on my left foot on the Next Percent shoe, and only got 1% with the Stryd Wind. And now I've been arguing with Stryd for some years that there's something wrong with my Stryd Wind, and unfortunately this seems to rather prove it, doesn't it? I've got air power as you might expect on the new one and hardly any on the right. Now you could say that was something to do with the Vaporfly, but I did actually do a test yesterday just wearing Endorphin Speed run shields. So no offset lacings or anything like that, and I certainly got the same result. I had a lot higher air power in the new one to the old one. So I think basically that's a difference. Now I'm not totally sure whether I've got the exact same weight on both the Next Generation and the Stryd Wind, but the key difference here is of course these differing air power contributions are causing these averages to be somewhat different. Now we have a look at some of the other stats. Heart rate obviously came from my Garmin. Form power 75 on both, so that's good. Ground contact time slightly less with the Next Generation at 205 average compared to 210. Leg spring stiffness, that was slightly higher with the Next Generation, 13.3 compared to 12.8. And the VO was slightly higher with the Next Generation, 7.31 centimeters compared to 7.23. And if you look at the individual mile splits here, then you can see that basically I had some miles where I had literally no air power at all, whereas it was consistently 4% with the Next Generation one. Now the Next Generation was actually paired to a Forerunner 955, and it got the distance pretty much exactly spot on. It was 9.99 miles or 16.08 kilometers, which is basically 10 meters short. So as you might expect from that, I didn't actually take pace or distance from the Stryd. Interestingly, the auto calibration gave 101.3% with the Next Generation one. Now, I always thought that my Stryd Wind was about 102.5, and this one, the Stryd Wind, was actually paired to a Garmin Forerunner 945 LTE, so it doesn't have the multi-band GPS, but it actually did very well on the GPS. Actually, it was only slightly over distance, that's why I've got this extra lap here, but only by a few meters, and that auto calibration gave 103.4. Now those results were very consistent with what I got doing a 4-mile easy run on Saturday as a bit of a shakeout in the Endorphin Speed Run Shield 2. So I think it does rather say that the calibration factor on these Stryds do differ unit to unit. Unfortunately, the Next Generation one is a bit nearer the default 100% than the Stryd Wind is, but certainly it does suggest that different Stryds work differently, which I always thought was the case, because the original ones I had, the original football ones that is, all differed as well. So I think I've now got 6 Stryds basically altogether, and they've all got different calibration factors. Now quickly going back to the Next Generation, there's a new metric here called impact loading rate of 73 BW per second. I think that must be some new metric that Stryd have introduced. I've got absolutely no idea what that means, whether that is useful or not. So please let me know if you understand what that is and how that might be useful. So if we now use the DC Rainmaker analysis tool to have a further look at this stuff, and here on the developer fields I've got the air power of the two. The purple one is from the Next Generation and the blue one is from the Stryd Wind, and you can see here that I've got virtually no air power in the Stryd Wind, as I said earlier, whereas the Next Generation one has substantial. These are actually in actual watts here rather than percentages. So we're averaging about sort of 10 to 15 watts, whereas we're 0 to 5 with the Stryd Wind. So instantly you can see I'm getting a higher overall power with the Stryd next generation just because I've got more air power. So now if you have a comparison of the actual power numbers here, now the purple line here is the next generation one and the blue line is the Stryd Wind, the older one. You can see there's quite a good correlation here. The course today was quite undulating, so I think these little spikes here correspond to little bits where I was actually going uphill, and more or less it does seem to match. Maybe a bit of elements there where the next generation one is just a bit higher, but don't forget these numbers actually include the air power, so you would expect that the purple line to be higher anyway, wouldn't you? Now, one of the claims by Stryd is that the new next generation one is more responsive by I think 5 times, and you can sort of see that they've got something on there, because from stationary when the race started, the purple line here, which is the next generation one, actually produced power a bit before the Stryd Wind is. The Stryd Wind came into being after 5 seconds, whereas the next generation one came into being after 2 seconds. So basically I've got 3 seconds more power at the start of the race. Now you might think, well, actually in the general scheme of things, if that's the sole reason to buy a new Stryd because you get 3 seconds more power from stationary, then perhaps you think that's a bit of a waste of money. I mean, I think it's one of those things, oh yeah, that's quite impressive, but reality is that's not really that useful in a race that took me 68 minutes. I mean, maybe if you're doing 30-second sprints, but I do wonder who's actually doing 30-second sprints and looking at their power during the 30-second sprints. I was more concentrating on my form and just getting the rep done. But if you think that's important, then that may be a useful selling point. I guess we'll have to do more testing of that. As I did see similar again with the Endorphin Speed 2 a test last night. So I think definitely say that it is slightly more responsive, but again, as I said, is that really that useful? Now in this race I didn't have pace or distance coming from the Stryd because I wanted to see what those auto calibrations were, but it's interesting to look at this graph here, which is the speed versus time plot for the two devices. So this is now not comparing Stryds, this is just looking at the actual Garmin's. And it's interesting actually that the blue line here, which is the older 945 LTE, has actually got a slightly smoother line than the multi-band GPS of the 955. I'm not entirely clear why that is. Maybe they think that they need to smooth the older GPSs more. But anyway, you can kind of see that if Stryd's meant to be more responsive on speed, as some claim, well, I'd argue that's not particularly useful in a steady state race like this, even though I was sort of going up and down hill a bit. Most of the time I was trying to run as even as possible, and you can sort of see here that these are pretty smooth pace lines. I mean, you don't get into this sort of jiggery pokery that you might expect from GPS on hearsay. I think the modern GPSs are so much better on their algorithms to smooth things out. But I'll be sure to do some tests where I take in the speed and distance from this Stryd next generation and compare it to the 955 and see what we get. I think when I did a test on that front, looking at the GPS in the London Marathon through Canary Wharf, I think I did actually prove that the pace coming from the 4runner 955 was actually smoother than from the Stryd. And okay, you might think, well, is that really great because it's less responsive in inverted commas? But as I said, most of the time I don't want a speed or pace that's jumping up and down a lot. I just want something that's nice and smooth that I look at, and then 5 seconds later it's still more or less the same. So I hope you enjoyed this little look at how the Stryd next generation is doing after a couple of runs. I mean, I would say already it's an improvement for me, but I think that might just sort of say that I've been shortchanged on that Stryd Wind for so many years. Don't think it's ever worked properly. So you could argue that I've now got a device that actually works as it's supposed to, and I never did. And the only other thing we've seen so far is responsiveness is improved by about 3 seconds.